So the first presentation today will be from Dr. Manuel Baeuml, who will present on cloud-enabled supply chain transformation. The synopsis of this presentation is cloud technology is no longer a new phenomenon for companies to ponder over, or an IT implementation. With many businesses now leveraging cloud to solve business problems compared to an IT enhancement of the past, cloud technology is getting more traction in the marketplace than ever before. So how can cloud technology enable supply chain transformation? So Dr. Manuel is here to present from us from AWS. He's the head of supply chain advisory and leads the AWS supply chain practice group in Asia Pacific and Japan. He helps clients to accelerate their digital transformations to build technology-enabled supply chain capabilities. Over the last 15 years, although he does look very young, he has helped and had the privilege to work with the industry leaders in Asia Pacific and Europe in retail and CPG, transportation and logistics, and natural resources to develop and implement supply chain strategies. His areas of expertise are digital transformations, omni-channel fulfillment, and inbound supply chain optimization. Prior to joining AWS, he was the head of transformation for LogiSYM Asia. He led the digitalization of freight industry service line for McKinsey in Germany and started his career with a yellow company, DHL. Manuel is responsible for solving clients' most pressing supply chain problems, inspiring a larger vision, sharing leading industry practices and building new digital supply chain capabilities. He's also a guest lecturer here in Singapore at the Management University and also St. Gallen University. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Manuel, Dr. Manuel, to present cloud-enabled supply chain transformations. Thank you. Sorry, one last thing, guys. QR code there for Q&A, so please feel free to jump online and get those questions in during his presentation. Manuel, thank you.
Hi, everyone. After this introduction with ChatGPT, doesn't make my life easier. But I know for next year, I'll just ask ChatGPT to please prepare my presentation. Most likely, Scott, we will not be able to finish in 30 minutes then, given the lengthy outline. Great. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. Give me 1 second. I'm not capable to do multitasking. Absolutely thrilled here to be with you today. If you have questions along the whole presentation, just raise your hand or provide your questions through the app. I'm happy to take it on the go. Otherwise, we have at the end probably another 5 minutes where we can discuss it as well. What the session is about is looking at the cloud and first of all, demystifying what is the cloud. And secondly, how does the cloud help you to solve business problems, not just IT problems. And we kick it off. Perfect. Introduced already. So the job I have is to explain companies how Amazon.com, which is our sister company, actually runs the supply chain. And then secondly, discuss with them how can we use cloud technologies, which is mostly relevant for supply chain, which is machine learning, obviously generative AI these days, Internet of Things, technology, IoT, as well as analytics, plus all the underlying plumbing for data, etc., and help them on the journey to transform, and both with hands-on support, but also with our partner network, which we bring to the table. So today, I would like to focus on 2 topics here. The first one is, why, in the first place, should companies move to the cloud in order to address business problems on supply chain? And then secondly, how exactly does now cloud technology help to solve the business problems and really drive business outcomes instead of just reducing IT infrastructure costs? Before we go there, maybe a quick introduction of AWS in case some of you are not aware of it. So AWS stands for Amazon Web Services. It is a subsidiary of Amazon. And at the end of the day, what it does is, or many companies associated with data centers, and that's probably not wrong. But what AWS does is, at the end of the day, is we bring compute power to run your applications and systems and provide additional services which allows you then to transform. And these services, AWS actually the broadest service spectrum in the market. We have more than 200 services today. which are, for example, machine learning, IoT, analytics, etc. But we also have the deepest spectrum. For example, if you look in machine learning, there's a whole range of services companies can use to either build solutions by themselves, or secondly, for our partner network, who have used these services already to provide you SaaS-based, cloud-enabled solutions off the shelf. We in AWS, we strive to be customer-obsessed. What it means is that we try to put the customer and your problem in the center, and it actually shows in our innovation as well. So in fact, 90% of all the services which were innovated in the past came directly from companies, from our customers who said, this is something we would like to have. This is where we are dissatisfied. If you look at it today, the tooling we have in the market, why can't you innovate something? And that's what we did. And the rest of the 10% we innovate on behalf of our customers. Giving a concrete example, last November, AWS announced a new solution, which is called AWS Supply Chain. So that's an inventory visibility tool, as well as a demand planning tool, which allows you to quickly see how can you rebalance your stock, etc. And this is something which comes without any SaaS fees, etc. So it has some benefits as well, and you can build on it as per your liking. When we go in, I would like to give you a quick round of hands, also good after the lunch break to wake everyone up, is maybe show me who of you actually thinks you have a really good or at least a solid understanding of what the cloud is. Yeah, couple of hands. Perfect. No worries. So for those who don't have the understanding yet, so in a traditional company, which has traditional on-premises IT, right? The easiest way to visualize it is that you typically have a server room down in the basement, right? Maybe you still have it, maybe your company has just abandoned it. And then this room, only a few people were actually allowed to go there, exit it. If you made it into, it was really warm, all the servers were there, a little bit of noise. And this is the traditional approach where pretty much all your applications, all your systems run on the servers which are in your basement or wherever you have them. And what the cloud does is it provides you exactly the same access to the same underlying compute power to run your applications or to host your data, but the only difference is that you don't have the server room anymore in your basement. You actually have outsourced this to a cloud service provider who runs the data center on your behalf. And this has big benefits because if you have it in your basement, you need to design it in a way that the peak demand, which if you're in transport logistics, probably around November, where you have massive volumes, and that your all IT applications don't break in this time, which means the rest of the year, you have way too much capacity from a server perspective for which you still pay on an ongoing basis. So the cloud helps you to move away from this onto an on-demand, pay-as-you-go scheme. And you can run the exact same applications which you're having. You can host your data there if you want that. This is what it does. So my colleagues from AWS who have a pure technical background, they would now say the two benefits of the clouds are, one is, on average, you can reduce your IT infrastructure costs by 31%. That's exactly as I just explained. You pay for what you need. Most of a year, you don't need a full suite of servers which you have in a basement. The second one is the famous word innovation, and I unfold this in a second. The cloud helps you to be more innovative. I want to give you two examples to bring it to life. The first one is, imagine today, if you are on premises and you have a fantastic idea on what you want to change on your TMS system or whatever, your demand planning system, right? What happens is you go to the IT team and say, I have a brilliant idea, let's do it. And then in most cases, probably, the answer you get is, agree, it's a fantastic idea. We put it into our development backlog, and in 9 months or 12 months, we will work on it. And the reason for this is that if you operate on premises on your own servers, on average, 70% of your IT department is busy in just keeping the lights on, by patching the underlying VM hardware, by patching the underlying infrastructure, etc. Which means if this is the case, your company actually invests 30% of your IT resources on innovating. And that's a huge benefit of the cloud. It takes away all this heavy lifting, we call it undifferentiated heavy lifting, put it onto a cloud provider such as AWS, who do this on your behalf, which means your IT teams can really go out there and innovate, trying things out, and are not busy with trying to pitch and patch whatever you have. The second reason for this is on innovation, and it's a super important point, is if you innovate today and you're touching your core system, let's stay with the TMS system, or if you're in freight forwarding, a freight forwarding system, right? The most important thing is, because you operate a network, is you don't want to break it. If it goes down for half a day or 2 hours, you have a huge issue. So what happens is that people are extremely cautious on how you upgrade. When you release, there's a whole plan around, etc. If you go on the cloud, you can follow a so-called microservices approach. Microservices means, for example, if you look at the Amazon.com website, behind the simple-looking Amazon website are actually 200 microservices. One microservices pulls out a picture. One microservices calculates how long it will take to ship out the item. One microservice calculates if the item is available in stock in the first place. And you can now, instead of just working on the entire front end, you work on one specific problem. You address it, you run an experiment. If it goes better, you actually upload it through a release onto the website, and then it gets launched. The chance of breaking your whole system goes massively down. This drives innovation. Good, so this is what my colleagues would say. I have a supply chain and transportation background. I say the cloud also gives you the following benefits. And you have seen it massively over the last years, which was obviously accelerated by COVID. The cloud helps you to solve business problems. For example, visibility. Funnily enough, in the different systems you're having today already, in the different spreadsheet your teams are keeping, for example, to track important shipments, the data is all there, but it's completely disconnected. And the cloud helps you to break up these data silos and actually creates visibility with data you have yourself or with partners who can provide as well. The cloud then obviously brings all the cool topics, machine learning, generative AI now, to look forward into the future. For example, you don't want to know what a stock out situation today is if you're a retailer. You want to know what the stock out situation might be in 8 to 12 weeks, so that today you can take the right actions, which could be to accelerate a PO, to place a second PO, expedite a shipment, etc. And lastly, the cloud also helps you to automate, and automation is a result of having visibility and more predictiveness and moving away from a firefighting approach, and I'll explain this later on exactly how this can be done. There's one last point which I'm super passionate about. And we have seen it massively over the last year. New customer or consumer experiences. If you think, for example, on the last mile, right? When everyone in the room knows the last mile is super expensive. But in an increasing digital world, the last mile is often also the only physical touch point a company has with a customer or consumer. So you want to think about how you or your 3L partner performs on the last mile. You want to send notification in advance. Customers, look at Singapore today. Everyone is used to 2 hours time windows delivery. Now people are discussing 1 hour. It's brilliant. From a supply chain operation, last mile operation perspective, it gets really expensive. This is an area where cloud technology, in this case machine learning, can help you to create new customer experiences on the last mile. It's amazing times, and I think, Scott, you said generative AI. We are experiencing it right now, and from a supply chain perspective, we are currently going through an inflection point. What we have observed over the last year, especially accelerated through COVID, everyone knows the famous vessel which got stuck in the Suez Canal, right? And you had zero visibility on when will my containers arrive. Companies have played around over the last three to 5 years back with what is this AIML, what is the cloud, how can I leverage it actually, right? And they have figured out that it's actually not only helps to reduce the IT cost, as I've shown you before, but it helps you to solve business problem, building on the systems you have already and building on the data you have already. So there's no need to build a completely new system on top or buy anything. You just leverage technology where you can leverage the existing solution and application landscape you're having today. I've picked one industry, which is the transport and logistics one, but I'm sure if you go through the other industry verticals, retail, CPG, manufacturing, etc., it looks very much the same. I can't share, obviously, the data with you today. Perfect. But I've plotted it here just on a timeline, and you can literally see it. On the upper half, what you see is that customers were going out to say, I want to use machine learning, and I want to try one specific use case. These are the famous POCs and MVPs people are talking about, right? And they're typically the ones where they would take and play around with demand forecasting, etc., right? But the interesting one is the one on the bottom, where companies have said, I actually want to massively innovate. And the way I do is I go all into the cloud, be it on AWS or other cloud providers. And this helps me to get more productive in my core, cost savings, but it also helps me to create completely new customer experiences. And I just want to call out a couple of them. If you look at RMX, it's a Middle Eastern freight forwarder. Already 2019, they said, this is what we're going to do. We not only be cloud first, we even go a step further, which is cloud native, where they also put all the applications and even the data into the cloud. And we use it to significantly reduce our cost base in a commoditized market. And we want to build and offer new services to our customers. So what we've done is, they've used, for example, machine learning to predict the arrival times of their ULDs and their containers. That was before COVID. It was very smart, because when the vessel got stuck, this was the number one pain point everyone had. So they're a freight forwarder, so they don't operate the different lines, right? But it helped them to predict transshipments. Will my container still make it on the next vessel, for example, transshipment hub Singapore? And if not, what do I need to share with my customers to keep them happy? How can I follow up with the carriers to make sure that we at least accelerate that container, which was rolled in Singapore? They've done a lot more. They've built a fancy web app, for example, where you can track where a specific container is. This is something which many leading forwarders, many carriers have today. I think it's already, but they did it already 3-4 years in the past, which is fantastic. The other one I wanted to call out is on the top, the Port of Long Beach. So is the PSA, so is DP World, for example. The ports have realized that within a supply chain, they actually sit on an amazing location. They are the nodes, which we talked about this morning, right? And they defined, I want to be a data highway provider, because all the data runs through this node. And what I'm offering to my customers is not only improved steering, for example, and operations when the containers come in and how to schedule to avoid all the long queuing at the port, but I offer a data product to my customers, which is, for example, increased visibility on when containers will arrive, etc., and connecting it. So it's a great opportunity for companies not only do more of the same, but also offer new services. One last I quickly want to call out is there's an Asian freight forwarder. They're actually in Japan. And they were on the lower, they were an industry laggard. They didn't even have a freight forwarding system. And they realized the only way to survive is that we go all in. We get a freight forwarding system to fix the core. That freight forwarding system runs on the cloud, which provides benefits like making the data accessible. And then they build currently 6 differentiating factors, which is nothing else than 6 use cases, for example, emission monitoring. And on emission monitoring, they're not only offering to their customers how much emission were caused from a shipment or how much emissions will be caused from a future shipment, but they actually build on top machine learning, which advises their customers on how they can reduce emissions if, for example, a customer is flexible on shifting from older vessels to newer ones, if they are more flexible on arrival times, etc. So this is state-of-the-art thinking of a laggard who said, this is my chance to transform, and I'm going all in, both for productive core as well as to build a competitive edge in the market. Good. When we think about digital maturity, we typically think along 5 pillars. The interesting thing is that, these 5 pillars go from, well, typically here, data sits somewhere in silos. I have digital silos. I applied already a little bit analytics or machine learning, but someone this morning said a data island. This is exactly stage 2, right? And then you have always the dream, we want to move towards an autonomous supply chain. And the reality is that very few companies, so I'm not aware of any company who have achieved this overall. I'm aware of some companies who have achieved this in parts. For example, if you look at Amazon.com, Amazon, if you look at the procurement process, 99% of the purchase orders are completely automated. There's a process they call supply chain optimization technology, SCOT, which you can look up even on YouTube, where a large part of the placement, etc., happens in a fully automated fashion. But the reality is, and we talked this morning about transformation, you will not get there overnight. It took Amazon 19 years to get where we are today. And if you talk about a transformation, a small POC will not bring you anywhere. From my experience, what you need to have is you need to provide a longer-term vision on where you want to be, for example, in 5 years. Define 10, 12 building blocks to break it down. And then for the first building blocks which you have prioritized, you run a POC, later on you build an MVP, and you implement it. Either do it yourself or you do it with partners. That's fully up to your own company. So most companies we meet here in Asia Pacific are somewhere in between digital silos and connected. Digital silos, I just explained it. Connected means now we're figuring out how can I have visibility on my end-to-end supply chain, right? And that's easier said than done. If you think about tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, there's very few companies who have solved this today. Later on I have an example where I show you how this can be approached in general. And once you have achieved this, then you actually come back to the point, it's very nice to know what's going wrong today, but it would be much more powerful if I knew what do I need to do today, what are the 5 actions today, so that in 8 weeks, in 10 weeks, nothing breaks, I have no bottlenecks, I have no stockouts, I have no mistransshipments, whatever industry you're in. And this is where then technologies such as AML come into play, digital twins come into play, which help you to simulate and have proactive and predictive alerts where you know where you need to focus on. So today I wanted to focus here on the topic of connected because I think it's for Asia Pacific overall, the companies I engage with, the most relevant one. And the challenge is that the data typically sits in silos, right? By the way, not only the data, also our teams sit in silos. Even our KPIs, which we give our teams, pulls us even further into the silos. Just give you an example. You're the logistics manager or the supply chain manager, and you're shipping a container from Ningbo in Ningbo in China to Singapore, right? And that container is falling behind. Then you have a KPI, which means on-time shipment, and you probably pick up the phone and make everything possible to expedite the shipment. But if you would know that there's a demand drop in 4 weeks down the line, and it actually makes no difference in having that container 2 weeks later, it would actually help you for your warehouse, then this could be much more powerful and that company would have saved some money. So that's funny. Even within our companies, there's a lot of the silos, data silos, operating silos, where cloud is perfectly suited to break up these silos and bring this, surface all the data which you have already somewhere in your systems, in your spreadsheet, in order to make the right decisions. If you then look at your suppliers, then it gets even more difficult, right? If you think about the typical supplier, not tier 1, I'm talking about tier 2 or tier 3, they typically sit in markets where they're not so tech savvy, or it's just not a priority to them. So even if they have the information, they might not always share it. So how do you break this down? And from you, if you manage the inbound, if you manage a warehouse, it's very basic questions you're looking after. Are the lead times realistic? Will the shipment reach on time? What does it mean for my inbound warehouse process tomorrow? How many staff do I need, etc., right? And lastly is, if you're in manufacturing, let's say automotive manufacturing, or if you're in mining, and you procure very complex products, let's say an engine or whatever. Then you also want to know where's the progress. Where is the supplier today with manufacturing this part? Because what typically happens is on the last day when something is due, you call up the vendor and say, where is it? And the vendor will say, yep, I'm sorry to inform you, there will be a delay by 2 weeks. This is not what you want to have. Sorry. So the case study I have with you today is from a luxury fashion retailer. So if you walk down the Orchard Road, you will definitely find a couple of stores from them. And they had the problem that they had limited visibility on where exactly did their products come from. So all the ingredients, all the materials for the product. So it was apparel, so therefore you go to mills and fabrics and farms, etc. So the simple answer, which is not a good answer, is to say, super easy, we deploy sensors, RFID, whatsoever, create full end-to-end visibility. The reality is, this doesn't always work. It's also very expensive. You have imbalances in your supply chain. It's a nightmare. So what they ask us is to say, can you help us think through how we can actually use pure data without any sensors to create visibility, not only for our tier 1 suppliers, but all the way down to tier 4, to the farms where the cotton comes in the first place. If we had this visibility, first of all, we can give it to our consumers. The consumers are requesting today a view where they can have sustainability, environmental views, etc., which then makes them feel more comfortable buying this very expensive product, obviously, right? But it also gives you massive advantages from a supply chain risk. For example, sourcing risks, right? Am I engaged with a vendor which doesn't adhere to the latest standards? Huge issue if you ship into Europe or Americas, for example. So the challenge they had is they had quite some data on suppliers. Visibility lasted till tier 1. They then went to the market and said there's plenty of startups out there which provide you vendor information. They bought a couple, but it was still a partial view of where the product actually came from. And this partial view were sitting in their own systems, for example, the ERP system, the vendor management system, product lifecycle system, etc., again in silos. And the second challenge they had is, well, as part of the process, the vendors would need to provide quite many certificates. And they were getting hundreds of certificates every day in 50 different languages. And from some vendors, they were not getting any certificates because they just took the one the previous supplier had, inherited it, and passed it on. So that company didn't make sense of these, what we call unstructured data, which means it's written somewhere, sometimes even manually on a sheet. They had the data, but they didn't use it at scale and could therefore not populate the information to the system. So they reached us and said, our goal is to create a complete data set, which really provides from tier 1 all the way to tier 4, the information is who manufactured it, what were the processing date, what's the garment style, what was the PO associated to it, did the quality adhere to the highest standards, what did the auditor say, etc. And as a first step, what we did is that we created, they call it a system of system, which I find a bit unfortunate. I would call it a meta layer based on the systems they had, because they didn't provide a new system, it was just a meta layer, which was nothing else to consolidate the data into a single pane of glass. What we did is we took these fragmented data out of the systems, out of spreadsheet, populated into a data lake. Then we enriched it with additional partner data. For example, AWS has a partner network. And thirdly, most importantly, we used machine learning to predict the missing data. What this means is that for quite many data entries, you can actually have a pretty high chance of saying, well, if it came from this tier 2 supplier and was produced on that specific date, there's actually a pretty high chance that the following tier 3 supplier has provided in the first place. And the second element which we've built in the solution was, and keep in mind that the vendors are often not tech savvy, is we built a very simple web interface where a vendor could just take a phone, take a picture, for example, of the certificates, simply upload it, and then it was automatically read out using with different readout technologies on machine learning to get the text read out and populate it into the system. And this ultimately allowed them to create such a traceability map. What you see here is the internal view, where they could go, for example, for sneakers. Yep. And they could really see, well, what is the history of this product? Like, what were the ingredients which went into it? And what you see here is, well, there's two tier 4 suppliers, two farms from India. The tier 1 supplier was a manufacturing part, then in Italy, etc. And it provided this visibility for them internally, for risk management, for follow-ups. And then they've externalized it, obviously, to their customers, to their consumers, through a simple QR scan, but they could scan it and see exactly the history of the products they were buying. So I think it's a very beautiful example of using the data you are having already, using technology to create more visibility. There's also a dirty secret, which is everyone talks about machine learning will solve all your problems. And it's a great technology, but the reality is there's always fine lines. So what you see here, for example, is the tier 1 coverage was pretty good, 73%. But then between tier 3 to tier 4, it drops. So also the best technology doesn't really help you. There's always a process element to it as well. But 32% on tier 4 visibility is already much better than having no visibility. And I think that was great for them. So once you have achieved visibility, as we discussed, you know what's going on today, right? But again, you want to know what will happen tomorrow and what can we do. And this is exactly where the technology, predictive technology, such as machine learning, comes into the play. And the spearhead of predictiveness is a digital twin. The digital twin, the problem with the digital twin is that there are already 50 different definitions and everyone has a different understanding of what it actually means. So when we in AWS talk about the digital twin, what we mean is a digital representation of a physical system that can be dynamically updated to mimic the structure as well as the behavior of a physical system, such as a warehouse or a supply chain. So it sounds very fancy. In simple words, I would just say this is a tooling which allows you to run simulations so that you can, for example, model what would be if the two vendors drop out, what would be impact on my die fault, how can I optimize the throughput in my warehouse. And the second and last example I have here with me today is a digital twin for a plant. Invista is a global manufacturer for fibers, for resins, for chemical intermediates, pretty much ingredients which go into everyday products, like an airbag, for example, right? And what they have done is they've spent the last 10, 15 years to apply all the lean management, Toyota production management, and they've reached a plateau on their productivity. And they requested us, can we think through how we can build a digital twin to completely rethink the way we do production as well as our warehouse management later on. And the way we approach it is that in two steps. The first step is they build a 3D model of the plant itself, where they pretty much created the relationships between all the different systems and equipment they had in there. They called this a connected worker, with the intent to proactively inform a worker on what they need to change to drive or increase throughput of this plant, right? And what they did is they used the sensor data, they had a different equipment, they looked at historic maintenance record, what machinery is likely to fail at what point, and lastly, they also installed cameras where they were actually tracking the throughput along the entire process. And then once they had this digital model, what they did is they actually turned it into a digital twin, where they then used simulation technology, which can be machine learning, can just also be mathematical optimization, to define how do we need to define it and set up our throughput, our system, our flows, so that we really increase the productivity and the throughput of our entire production. So the very same thinking can be applied in warehouses, and there's many solutions in the market already. And the questions I typically get at this point is, what about supply chains? Can we have digital twin on supply chains? And the simple answer is yes, they exist already, but they're a lot more difficult. Because if you're a manufacturing company like Invista, well, you have all the data right in your production plant, right in your warehouse. It's easy, you can apply sensors yourself. But in a supply chain, the average pallet is touched by 14 different parties along the supply chain, which means where the data sits everywhere. So therefore, it's a bit more difficult to model, but there are solutions like Palantir, for example, where you can exactly see if the following 3 suppliers drop out, what is the impact on DIFOT and KPIs, and therefore risk you're having. Great, that brings me to the end. The 5 things I would like you to take away from this session is, firstly, whatever industry you're in, there's a very high chance there's a massive transformation in your industry going on right now. And the biggest risk is to do nothing. In AWS, we talk about a day 2 company. A day 2 company means you missed the train, you're not investing so much in innovation, and others are pretty much creating better services or running at lower costs. So when Jeff Bezos actually was asked, well, how does this day 2 looks like? He said, after mulling it over quite a bit, he said, for him, a day 2 company is a company where you see a lot of stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciation and painful decline. So it's a slow process where your margins might come down, where your customers may go to other competitors, and which is why it's so important to join, innovate right now in your industry and get going. The second one is cloud technology is not only about IT. I think as we see today, there's many applications, there's many use cases where you can actually use clouds to solve specific business problems. And I hope this is all why we're here today. And this is, at least for me, the exciting part. Third, we talked about transformation today. Transformation is extremely difficult. Someone said 30% of all transformation fails, right? So we think the good practices we have seen is you need to lead from the top, which means in the first place to have a vision of where you want to go, concrete building blocks on how you achieve them. But you also need to lead from the bottom by allowing for experimentation, by inviting small teams to figure something out, having a microservices architecture, and run experiments. And that brings us to the last point. Always take a long-term view. If we run POCs, some of these POCs will fail. Other POCs will go well, customers will like it, you build it into an MVP, and you sketch it out. And this is exactly what innovation is about. It's not just about the successes, it's also about failing fast and experimenting. Great, with that, I would open it up to questions. Sorry, Scott, my app went down, so I couldn't see if there are any questions from there.
Is there any quick questions? Tim, can you yell? Yeah. Okay.
Security on is cloud, is the infrastructure in the cloud itself kind of like organized in such a way to minimize impacts there when it comes to security?
Yeah, so I think for every cloud provider, security is what we call job zero. If there's no security, if we can't ensure security, companies would lose trust. So there's a whole suite of security measures, the way it is designed. For example, if one data center would burn down, well, there's a second one, and availability zone just runs, but also which keeps bad parties from hacking the systems, etc. The benefit of the clouds is actually that you always benefit from the latest security toolings, which way sometimes is actually more secure than your own on-premises setup. And if you say you're, for example, a bank, right, and you have particular requirements from a legal perspective to keep data just within your own 4 walls, etc. There's also services such as AWS Outpost, which allows you to get servers which are run actually by AWS, but they are physically in your building and no one else can access it. It's a private virtual cloud only for you. So there's a lot of security tools out there to mitigate any data breaches, etc.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, we might just hold questions because we're a little bit tight for time, but I'm sure that you can connect with Dr. Manuel in the break. I think he'll be very happy to answer any questions on that. But on behalf of everyone here, thank you. That was a great presentation. And if you're not playing with the cloud right now, then you should be. So start to look at it. That was the main takeaway. Don't wait. Don't be a day two company. So, Manuel, thank you very much. Appreciate that.